today with Mr. Edward Watts, who has the lead in the revival of the Superman musical. It's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman, playing at the New York City
Center Encores. Yeah.
New York City Center. Thank you very much for your time. It's a pleasure to have you.
Sure.
Are you a Superman fan?
You know, I haven't been. You know, throughout the years, I've not followed the comics, you know, as religiously certainly as I'm sure a lot of people have been. Grew up watching, of course, the Christopher Reeve movie, and I saw the George Reeves television series on reruns, and I've always been a fan of the character himself, but I've never been too much of a huge comic book fan to follow every issue.
Now that you've had some time with the role, would you say you're a bigger Superman fan than before?
I think I probably will be. Yeah. Playing a character like that certainly gets you into that thought process and wanting to find out a lot more. And of course, just doing research for the character itself, you find out a lot more about the origin, the different origin stories, and of course how the character of Superman throughout the years has sort of ebbed and flowed with the times and the political climates. And I find that all quite fascinating, actually.
Now, I believe in a previous musical you played a dual role.
Right.
So did that help you prepare for this role? Did that make you a little bit more in sync with the duality of Superman and Clark Kent?
I don't know if it actually helped me prepare for it so much as perhaps it allowed the people who were casting this to really understand and see that I could play two distinct characters. I think that, you know, as far as the acting ability or the background to be able to take that on, I think if I could say so about myself, it was sort of already there. But you know, in this town, there's a lot of actors, and there's a lot of people that are gunning for these roles. And I think playing that character, I played two characters in the musical Scandals on Broadway, which was Broadway last fall. And I think when the people that saw that and who already knew me really understood, oh yeah, this is the kind of guy who can play these sort of multiple dual roles, especially very different. One, in this case was Superman, obviously one meek and mild, and one, strong. And the characters that I played in the other show, one was very much a fiery Irish preacher type guy, and the other one was a Hollywood matinee idol. So very different characters, and I think they saw that and probably said, okay, there's our guy. At least I'd like to think so.
Did you have to get in shape at all for the part?
I was already in shape. So, being a leading man type, I'm 6'4", and have always been athletic my whole life, so it's one of those things that I've kept up. Get to the gym regularly because I know that these are the sorts of roles that people are going to cast me in. So, you let yourself go soft, and then somebody says, hey, we want you to play, the guy who takes his shirt off or whatever, and then you're behind the 8 ball. So basically, I mean, thank God my parents, gave me great genetics, so it's not a difficult task in the intervening times to just sort of stay in fairly decent shape. And then, you get cast and you say, okay, now I'm going to hit it even a little harder and make sure I'm in shape to wear some spandex.
Speaking of taking your shirt off, your quick change sequence at the beginning of the musical, and I timed it, it was under a minute. That was excellent. How did you pull that off?
Well, I'm hoping it was probably under about 20 seconds, actually. It's the first change that I do. Superman is the first of the two characters scene, and then there's a phone booth scene where I got to go in and change into Clark Kent. And I have two dressers that are standing just off stage, and I step into the phone booth, and the whole character of Clark Kent, the clothing-wise, is all rigged. So it's all basically one piece. So I step off stage, the cape comes off immediately, and there are two people there to basically get me into a suit, but it's a jumpsuit. It's all rigged with just one zipper right up the middle. So you step in, you do that real quick, you step right back out on stage, and then it's just a matter of putting on a jacket and a hat, and you're good to go.
One of the songs, your opening song is about doing good, but aside from doing good, what do you feel motivates a character like Superman?
Well, he's very black and white. It's one of the things I like a lot about a character like Superman and about a show like It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's Superman, is that, there's not a lot of subtlety to it. Our show is, it's really, we really sort of embrace the 60s camp and the satire of it. So, when it comes right down to it, Superman is all about being the uber good guy, the Superman. So I honestly don't really see a whole lot less than just, perfection and being the good guy for him. That's what motivates him, and we say it a lot throughout the show. And it's actually part of the psychological problem that he runs into with the evil Dr. Sedgwick, is if that's all you're you know, all that motivates you and all that you sort of live for, what happens when that's taken away? So, you know, for me, there's not really too much past that for Superman.
Who's the real guy, Superman or Clark Kent?
Superman. So another interesting thing I like about this character as opposed to some of the others is that Superman is who he is. You know, he's the Kryptonian. He, you know, is an alien, if you will, from another planet, and he has to disguise himself as Clark Kent. Whereas somebody like Batman, you know, he disguises himself as Batman to do his good deeds. Spider-Man, he puts on the costume to disguise himself. You know, not Peter Parker. He's, you know, he's Peter Parker first, and the superhero second. So this is one of those interesting things about Superman is that, you know, he was first the super guy, and has to disguise himself as the mild-mannered guy in order to sort of walk amongst the mortals.
How did you feel the first time you wore the suit?
Pretty invigorating, actually. And all of my cast, of course, was interested in seeing what it was like. So, you know, the first time you step out of the dressing room and walk out on stage, it becomes a little event in and of itself. It's interesting that, you know, you were mentioning the last show I did, the second act character, the matinee idol character that I mentioned, I was pretty much naked for like half of that act. You know, I was wearing a fig leaf and these, you know, biblical portrayals of Adam and you know, the Adam and Eve scenes and things like that. This was actually, strangely enough, putting on that costume a little more difficult, even though I have far more coverage in this. You know, I have this suit on, but it's skin tight. First of all, it's, you know, lycra and spandex or whatever the material is. But living up to an image that people have of Superman, you know, you see the images that are out there, and he's, you know, he's enormous. You know, he's, you know, this hulking guy in many ways. You know, big muscles, and especially the way they draw him these days. You know, he's ripped and big, and you know, I found it more daunting to wear more clothes, but as this character that everybody has, you know, an image of, than these people that nobody really knew. There were real people that I played from that other show, but you know, nobody knew who they were, so there wasn't an expectation. So as fun as it was to be in the costume, the expectation of what people, you know, want from it was the most daunting part of it.
Okay. Well, I saw the show, and I really thought it was very cleverly done. But do you have any regret about not being able to fly in the actual show?
Of course. Oh yeah. That was actually, there were 2, sometimes 3 main questions that people asked when I was announced that I was going to be playing Superman. And that was, are you going to fly? Was the big one. And are you going to wear the suit? You know, because this is sort of a, you know, Encores is a it was originally designated as like a concert version of these shows, but now they're pretty much fully produced. So people always wonder how far they're going to go with how they're going to costume or what the sets are going to be like. So it was, you know, the flying, are you going to wear the suit, and are you going to have the dark hair? You know, because my natural hair color is not that sort of jet black with the blue highlights that you always see in the comics. And I knew right away that they were definitely going to be doing the suit. I wasn't sure about the hair. I was hoping they were going to either dye my hair or, you know, give me a wig. But the flying thing, I was so hoping and crossing my fingers that they were going to rig me up and fly me. But again, it's being sort of a concert version. You know, there just wasn't the time to try to rig that up, or quite frankly, the resources for them to do it in that small amount of time. We only have a week and a half to get the whole thing up. So we would have had to spend the entire week and a half just on the fly rigging and, you know, working that out so it was all safe. So sadly, yeah, couldn't do it this time.
One of the words I heard repeated throughout the show is indestructible. Superman is indestructible. That being said, how did you approach his most vulnerable moment when he sings "The Strongest Man in the World"?
Well, again, this is the psychological part that I find the most fascinating about this particular story. You know, because in the reality of the Superman world, the only thing that can defeat him is kryptonite. You know, or, you know, beings from another dimension or some of the other things that they've used, but kryptonite being the main one. And so we didn't introduce that idea, or the writers didn't introduce that idea. Robert Benton and David, what's David's last name? That's going to kill me. What's David's last name? Anyway, they didn't introduce the idea of kryptonite, but what they did introduce was this idea of a psychological battle. So while he is indestructible, physically indestructible, you know, you start getting into this idea of what happens, like I was saying before, if Superman isn't needed anymore, if he can't do good, then what is he here for? So getting in touch with that for this idea of being the strongest man in the world, but but what good is that if nobody needs the strongest man in the world? So, you know, you can tap into that, you know, the sort of inner struggle that, you know, for me as an actor I have as well, of, all right, well, what happens when nobody needs me as an actor, who, you know, who wants me to do their roles, and I'm, you know, sitting at home unemployed waiting for a phone call. You know, those are the things as an actor you sort of tap into to figure out how to, you know, get in touch with a character like Superman. So, you know, we all have those moments. It was fairly easy to, you know, to work, especially with Jenny Powers, who plays Lois Lane, and she's, you know, she's standing right in front of me with tears in her eyes saying, I'm moving on because, you know, you can't commit to me. And it makes it all easy, you know, all those things sort of wrap up to make it a lot easier to get in touch with that sort of side of even invulnerable, you know, characters like, you know, such as Superman.
How does it feel to be added to the great list of actors who've all played Superman?
It's very humbling, definitely, to be added to that sort of pantheon, even though in many ways I sort of think, well, I'm just doing a, you know, small show here in New York City, but there seems to be so much interest in, you know, from people from not only the musical theater world, but also people from the world of Superman who are big fans and, you know, run websites and things like that. I don't know that it's really settled in me that, you know, I could be part of that. You know, to me in many ways, you know, I'm just a guy playing a role. But the more, you know, the more interviews and things that I do, and the more that people are interested in, they come to see the show, the more I sort of think, wow, yeah, this is great. Like, I love being a part of that, and I hope this isn't the last time I get to do it. You know, maybe this will just be the first time that this show will be done, and hopefully more people will get to see it, since we only have the 7 shows. But it's pretty special, and I certainly am not discounting how special that is.
The original production had a criticism. One of the biggest criticisms with the original production was that there wasn't enough Superman in the show. That a lot of the, you know, a lot of the sequences, a lot of the songs, the big songs, were for other characters. Now I saw the show and I didn't really feel that. I didn't feel that Superman was really absent from the show because he's either being spoken about or he's being sung about. But what's your take on that? Do you feel they could have doubled a little bit more Superman, or did they get it just right?
The only thing that I was thinking as I was getting to know the show and rehearsing it was, I only have one song in Act 1. And it's the very beginning of the show. The very first song that we hear is Superman singing the "Doing Good" song. You don't hear him sing anymore. And for a musical, for the main character not to sing, you know, at least the second song in Act 1, that seemed a little strange to me. I don't actually mind the perceived imbalance, because the great thing about the way that it's structured is that the other lead characters, the evil doctor, Max Menken's character, Lois Lane, and even the other female character, Sydney in this case, they all get such great songs, and you really get to flesh out those characters. And a lot of times, being the central character, we know what Superman's about, so it's fairly easy to set up, you know, the character and who he's all about very quickly. You know, people get it. But these other characters, because they weren't allowed to use some of the more well-known characters, you know, the Lana Langs and the Perry Whites and the Jimmy Olsens that we all know from, you know, the Superman stories, they didn't get to use those for this. We sort of have to establish these other characters. So I think it's great that there's not too much, you know, because a lot of times you get too much material for the main character, and we don't get to flesh out the others. So besides the fact that I would love to sing maybe one more song in Act 1, I think it was actually great that they got, you know, some pretty good, you know, some pretty good songs, some great scenes to establish themselves over what we already know as Superman.
Without a doubt, Superman is the greatest superhero, greatest comic character of all time. However, he does have competition, and his competition is not very far from us in the
That's true.
Very Foxwoods.
Right.
But I saw the show, and I found that they also do a good number of camp, satire, and I wonder how much of that is actually attributed to its predecessor in the Superman musical. Do you have any opinion on that? Does Spider-Man owe anything to Superman in coming first in terms of musicals?
I haven't seen Spider-Man, first of all. I have a friend who just got into the show, so I think I'm going to see it soon to catch him do his thing as the Green Goblin. I mean, from what I understand, I think all superheroes sort of have to give a tip of the hat to Superman, like, you know, the Spider-Mans and everything, because he was the first one. As far as a musical goes, I know this one was the first one back in 1966, and really nothing's been done since then. So I think Spider-Man, you know, they took a huge risk with that, and they spent a lot of money, and the effects in it, from what I hear, are pretty spectacular with the flying and everything. I think sometimes that sort of thing can overshadow the story. And again, without having seen it, I don't have an opinion on how good or, you know, mediocre, whatever you want to call it, the Spider-Man that's there. But when I first heard about all the stuff they were doing with the flying, I'm sure it's a great spectacle, but I just wonder, how good is that story? Do we really get to invest ourselves in that? And, you know, as far as, you know, how much they owe to the original Superman, without having seen it, it's tough to know whether they took a lot of cues from that. I like to hear that, you know, there's some satire involved with it, because we are talking about these incredibly heightened, you know, fictional scenarios with superheroes, and if you go too much down the realistic side, I think you're going to lose a little bit of something. So I like to hear that there's at least some of that.
If you had the chance, would you update the musical at all? A lot of things in comics now, they like to modernize. They want to make things a little bit more gritty, more edgy. But again, I saw the show last night. I thought it had a perfect fit, perfect balance. There was nothing wrong with it. But you know, you're in the show. Would you modernize it at all? Well,
they did do a little bit of work, but mostly cutting-wise. They trimmed the show down a little bit from the original 1966 version. Newman, that was his name. David Newman. There you go. Finally got it out. That Robert Benton and David Newman put together. Jack Fertel and our director John Rando, they trimmed it down a little bit. I think some of it for time, but also for a little bit for content, to streamline the story and make sure that we're hitting the plot points and we're not getting bogged down in sort of side stories that aren't necessary. Beyond that, I actually agree with you. I think a lot of times, you know, when people try to do revivals of classic, you know, musical theater pieces, you know, they try to modernize them, and they try to, you know, take out things that are very much a sign of the times for when these were written in the time periods that they're set in. And I think this, and again, going back to this idea that these are comic book characters, you know, and they're very much more of a black and white world. And the more you try to introduce nuance and subtlety, I think you lose, at least in my opinion, I think you lose some of the idea of that heightened world, and that it's a different world than ours. And you know, the whole idea is you go and see theater, you see a movie, you sort of get lost in that, and you suspend your disbelief, and you just go to that place. And one of the things I love about our show is that, you know, it's 1960s. You know, we have the music, the hop, all those amazing things that Joshua Bergasse, our choreographer, did to take us back to that time period, and the clothing, the sets, all of it. I think it lends to it, and I think the more you start fiddling with it, besides just maybe, you know, streamlining it a little bit or something like that, I think you're going to lose something, and, you know, lose what hopefully you saw, what it sounds like you did, which is a really great show that transports you back and gives you a fun evening at the theater.
Now, another name, well, Clark Kent is synonymous with Superman, but the other name that is also pretty much synonymous with Superman is Lois Lane. I was a little surprised that Lois Lane actually has some competition in the form of Sydney, but you got to actually interact with both of them, so if you have to choose, Lois Lane or Sydney?
Interesting. Having nothing to do with the two amazing actresses that play the characters, Alli Mauzey playing Sydney and Jenny Powers playing Lois Lane, I think just purely from a Clark Kent's point of view, you know, you got to go with Lois Lane. I mean, she's not only is she the iconic, you know, love interest of Clark, but I think she's all, you know, she's the hard-nosed reporter. And I mean, now maybe I'm speaking more personally for myself, but like, you know, women that have strength and power and are not, you know, not just the hangers-on. So I've always liked that character of Lois Lane, and I really like when she's played with a lot of like grit and moxie, and you know, you see her as her own strong-willed woman, and somebody that could be a really great partner for somebody like Superman / Clark Kent.
And last question: how's playing Superman affected you personally? Not professionally, but personally.
Not professionally. It certainly would be a little easier to talk about the professional side. You're right. Personally, I don't know. I don't know that it really has. You know, it's hard to try to take in a character like Superman. I mean, the one thing I will say about the character of Superman in general, and now that I'm able to portray him, is you really look inside, I think, a lot of times, and you see the psychological aspects of being somebody like Superman. You know, he is all alone. He's the only one of his kind. You know, he has to hide. He has to give himself to the whole world, and it's tough for him to get involved with somebody, even like Lois Lane, because he knows that he's not going to be able to commit to one person. And it's really interesting to dig into the psychology of that and see how that applies to your own life, and especially being an actor, where we're always trying in many ways to please everybody, because we want the next role, we want for everybody to like us so that we'll work, and we all have those sort of insecurities in that way. And I think when you try to get in touch with a character like Superman, that's, I think, a very important thing to remember about him, is that he has this inner battle, this inner struggle, and at the same time he has this motivating factor of always wanting to do good. And I think that struggle is not only interesting for playing the character itself, but to sort of, for me personally, being who I am in this business, to sort of take stock of where I am in life, and trying to please people, and sometimes finding yourself all alone in that idea of not just being yourself and showing who you are, and letting people see that and see that you're not invulnerable, and it draws you closer to people. And it's the one thing that I've always found, is that the more you sort of seek perfection, the more you're gonna not allow people in, because we can't relate to perfection, just like people can't really relate to Superman. So it was sort of life lessons that you learn playing a character like this.
Mr. Watts, Ed,
Great.
thank you very
Nice
much
to
for
meet
your
you.
time.